Okay, good morning, comrades. I'm speaking to this short briefing paper, which comrades have in the packs, but I'm not going to say very much about it. We've just had an extraordinary episode. First off, the National Intelligence Estimate is produced by US intelligence agencies saying the Iranian regime is not seeking the bomb, was seeking the bomb sometime in the past, but has not been seeking the bomb for at least 3 years. Second off, probably related to this, Admiral Fallon, who's the theatre commander in Iraq, Afghanistan and the Gulf generally, has said to a reporter that an attack on Iran will not happen on his watch, and that he and others are trying to rein in the crazies. What happens immediately after? The Fallon stuff has not been widely publicised. What happens immediately after the publicity for the National Intelligence Estimate? Bush says, doesn't make any difference. Not only Bush says doesn't make any difference, the Democratic contenders for president and the Democratic Party in Congress shows that they're more on side for attack on Iran or hostility or sanctions, further sanctions, etc., 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 than they are for Iraq. Thirdly, the Allies are wheeled out. We start with the Israeli government saying, we are still actively considering a military strike against Iran. That's all along been one of the most plausible ways in which open war with Iran could start, is an Israeli military strike on Iran, which then triggers an Iranian response, which then triggers a, quote, justified, unquote, US-British response. But in turn, all the allies are wheeled out. Not just the British this time, the French Prime Minister, the German Prime Minister, the French President, the German Chancellor are wheeled out to announce that they still think, in spite of this National Intelligence Estimate, that Iran is a threat to world peace. Wow. Why is this happening? Well, why it's happening, the first stage of why it's happening, why the National Intelligence Estimate, and why Admiral Fallon's remarks. It's irrational and stupid and simply a waste of lives and money for the United States to launch a military attack on Iran. It would be mad for the United States, after what's happened in Iraq, to engage in a land invasion of Iran, and it's not going to happen. It's very unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen is a very large-scale bombing campaign, quite possibly involving the use of at least tactical nuclear weapons. That's what the United States is threatening Iran with, and has been threatening Iran with more or less overtly for the last 3-4 years. But this is irrational. What does it let loose? American troops are bogged down on the ground in Iraq, in Afghanistan. What does it let loose to launch a new full-scale war on Iran? And it's for that reason that we've got hostility within the core of the United States state bureaucracy, within the military, within the intelligence, to an attack on Iran. But nonetheless, we also have the other side of the coin, the complete solidarity of the political regime in the United States. There is not a contradiction between the Democratic and Republican parties on the question of Iran, and the complete solidarity of the central political regimes of the European imperialist powers with military threats against Iran. So what we have is a deep commitment to irrationality. And if people were acting rationally, the invasion of Iraq and the occupation of Iraq would never have taken place. The attack on Iraq was mad. The invasion of Iraq was mad from the point of view of any rational policy of imperialism as a whole, of the imperialist powers as a whole. And it's that irrationality which means that there is a real threat of an attack on Iran. It's important to understand this because the fact it's driven by irrationality, it's not driven, and this is one of the profound errors of the people who currently lead Stop War Coalition. It's not driven by an axis of Ahmadinejad and Chavez, as was suggested by Tariq Ali, as a new anti-imperialism based on the poor and the people of the slums. That's garbage. That's not what the character of whatever the character of Chavez, it's not the character of the Iranian regime. The fact that imperialism makes Iran a target, the fact that US imperialism made Iraq a target, is not a product of the anti-imperialist character either of the Ba'athist regime in Iraq before it fell, or of the Iranian regime of the theocratic regime in Tehran. These threats and this attack and this irrationality is driven by the specific decline of US capital, not by a global crisis of not necessarily by a global crisis of capitalism as such, but by the fact that the specific decline of US capital means that it needs to export from its own territory the destruction of production and finance and infrastructure which would happen if the crash which is needed were in the United States economy, and the devalorization of capital which is needed for the central capitalist countries to progress. If that devalorization were allowed to happen, political stability would fail in the central countries. And the United States needs to export destruction. It needs to export destruction in order to keep the bubble economy afloat. That means that there are going to be targets. Iraq was not the first target for the export of destruction. Perhaps the fifth or the sixth target for the export of destruction was Iraq. And it will not be the last target for the export of destruction either. That does not mean that we can guarantee in the very short term that there will be an imperialist military attack on Iran. At the moment, the US is manoeuvring. It wants an outcome, the overthrow of the regime. It wants an outcome, a regime which will play ball more effectively with it in Iraq. It may want a number of different outcomes. These outcomes are not necessarily to be achieved by massive destruction and bombing campaign. But if there isn't a massive destruction and bombing campaign in relation to Iran, there is going to be one somewhere else. Iran is the immediate target. Iran is the target of the immediate threats. Iran is the target of the immediate sanctions. I noticed that somebody has put up an amendment to the founding statement to say we oppose sanctions, which I think is absolutely a correct amendment. Iran is the immediate target, and there is therefore a perfectly real and genuine threat of military action. Whether it materialises or something else materialises, it's in a context in which the United States is exporting destruction, will export destruction, and will continue to do so. And because Iran is the most immediate target, it is an urgent task for us, not merely to oppose the regime, but also to impose that threat of imperialist war. Sorry if I've overrun.
Oh, no.